Cattlemen's Association Beef Innovator of the Year. You're about to find out what's happening in the North Dakota legislative session. Your host of the Legislature Today is Dale Wetzel, managing editor of Great Plains News and the Great Plains Examiner. If you have questions or comments or to watch the show, go to GreatPlainsNews.com. GreatPlainsNews.com. The Legislature Today is brought to you by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, the University of Mary, the North Dakota Corn, Soybean and Grain Growers Association, and the North Dakota Ethanol Council, the Northwest Landowners Association, Touchstone Energy Cooperative, North Dakota Rural Electric Cooperatives Association, and members Minn Kota Power and Great River Energy, the North Dakota chapter of Concerned Women for America, the Expressway Inn and Suites, where a good night's rest costs less, and the Peacock Alley. It's time to get started. Another hour of the Legislature Today is on the air.
This is Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today. We're here at the Peacock Alley, American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. It's been a reasonably warm day, and some of the mountains of snow outside have melted off, and you can find a place to park more easily than you could yesterday. So please come down. This is a wonderful place to have a drink, have a nice meal, and look at the pictures on the walls. It's got a wonderful ambiance. It's a historic place. The Peacock Alley, American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. We broadcast from the balcony and webcast from the balcony, and we have a great time here, and we love it here. And I think that you would too if you came down to patronize the establishment. We have, for our first half hour of the show, we have the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. His name is Ray Holmberg. He's a Republican from Grand Forks. First, I thought I'd quickly run through a few things that happened in the legislature today. One of the items that got final approval today was an end to the ban on Election Day campaigning in North Dakota. You may not be aware of this, but it is illegal in North Dakota to solicit votes on Election Day, to put a yard sign in your yard, and generally engage in any sort of partisan political activity on the thesis that people like to go to vote without yard signs distracting them in the boulevards. Well, this idea was challenged in a federal lawsuit last year. The federal judge blocked the law from taking effect, and the matter was taken to the legislature, which has approved a bill now that says you can campaign in North Dakota on Election Day as long as you're further than 100 feet from a polling place. And there's also a rather interesting provision in this law. It says that a political sign on private property can't be restricted by a local government unless the government shows that it causes a public safety problem. There are cities in North Dakota that regulate political signs, when they can be placed and where. Bismarck is one of them, and we'll see how that works. One of the interesting debates in the legislature today was about whether to replace the Board of Higher Education, which has been kind of a favorite whipping boy of this legislative session. The constitutional amendment that was proposed and defeated by the narrowest of margins, one vote, would have replaced the board with a 3-member higher education commission, which would run North Dakota's university system. Essentially, it would be a system with a 3-headed chancellor, and one of the 3 heads would have private executive business experience. One of them would have a professional position within the higher education system, such as a professor or a university administrator, and there were no qualifications listed for the third person, which allows the imagination to run wild. There is precedent for a state agency that's run by 3 people. One of them is the Public Service Commission, which, of course, has existed since statehood in one form or another. Another recent precedent was the former Workers' Compensation Bureau, which is now known as Workforce Safety and Insurance, which at one point in its history during the 70s and 80s was run by a 3-person board before that arrangement was replaced in favor of a director appointed by the governor. Also wanted to mention a sad note today. Mr. Robert W. Peterson, otherwise known as Bob Peterson, has died. He died Wednesday at the Baptist home in Bismarck. Robert W. Peterson is the father of the current state auditor, Robert R. Peterson, who is also known as Randy Peterson. Bob Peterson's funeral is at 2 o'clock Monday at the Lutheran Church of the Cross in Bismarck. He was the auditor, state auditor, from 1972 to 1996 for 24 years, and when he stood down and did not run for re-election, his son, Robert R. Peterson, succeeded him, and Robert R. Peterson is still the state auditor today. Robert W. Peterson, Robert the Elder, beat a couple of future political giants in his 6 statewide campaigns. In 1976, he defeated Kent Conrad for re-election, and in 1984, he defeated Heidi Heitkamp. Of course, both Kent Conrad and Heidi Heitkamp went on to serve North Dakota in the U.S. Senate. Bob Peterson was a graduate of Wilson High School. He later coached and taught in Williston. He coached Phil Jackson, who was a University of North Dakota basketball star and of course, much better known as the championship coach of the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers. Turning to our guest, Senator Ray Holmberg. He's a Republican from Grand Forks. Tell us about yourself, Mr. Holmberg, Senator Holmberg. Where are you from? How long have you been in the legislature, and what's your background?
I was born in Grand Forks, but grew up in Trail County, which is the county that keeps Cass and Grand Forks apart, on a farm. We were sharecroppers. I went to UND, worked for a while in Bismarck as an ag representative for Job Service, North Dakota, and then went to Grand Forks and began a teaching career, mostly at Central High School, ending my career as a counselor. I was elected along with Jimmy Carter in 1976, so I guess I'm the longest continuously serving member of the legislature today, which means I get to pick out a good seat in the Senate, but doesn't mean much more than that. And I retired a few years ago and now devote myself to grandchildren and travel and the North Dakota legislature.
I understand that you ran for Superintendent of Public Instruction a couple of times. How was that?
Well, it was interesting because you really got to see the diversity of the state traveling around. I mean, there's a vast difference between some of the communities I visited south of the interstate, down where German is also a language, and the northeastern part, the western part. It was very interesting, and I would never tell a legislator or someone in government not to have that opportunity to run, although you have to be careful because you might end up in debt like I did.
How much in debt?
I think I ended up $5,000 in the hole, so I was on my Visa card, at 18% or whatever it was then. So.
Sounds lovely.
Yes.
What is our budget situation presently? I mean, the last update that I've been privy to from the Legislative Council showed us $730 million in the hole in terms of matching revenues and expenditures. What are things? How do things stand presently?
Well, they changed to being roughly $1 billion in the hole today because of some different legislation that was passed out of one of the houses. But now the challenge, which we've always risen to in the legislature, is to balance the books, see what needs to be done. There's a saying this legislative session particularly that, and I think that Dustin will love this, we have this session, we have needs based on facts, and we have needs based on the fact we have money. And that becomes a challenge as we, are finishing up our days. But we will get the books balanced. The measure that passed today in the House dealt with additional property tax relief. And, of course, that's just added into the big pot. So now I think we're a little over $1 billion of property tax restructuring relief, whatever you want to call it. It's a buy down at the end of the day. So we will. And there are some opportunities to trim some of the spending that the legislature has done. And we will just have to do that over the next days and do some final prioritizing and then go home.
What do you think is going to give first as the legislature tries to balance its books? Are the tax cuts going to become smaller or the spending increases?
I think it's going to be a combination of all of the above. I think that the tax reductions will end up closer to the executive recommendation. I think some of the spending will be trimmed. It's very difficult this session, the way the budget was constructed, to really keep your finger on this general fund spending that people always talk about, because the governor in his budget had spent money in a number of areas, quite a bit of money, that never really went through the general fund, although the average Joe would say, well, that was money raised by general taxes and was spent. So one of the things the legislature has done this session is, for the most part, move that money into the general fund so that it counts. And that makes a difference, and in part that increases the amount of, quote, general fund spending there is. But there is an increase in spending across the board. People look at the huge increase in tax collections, like income tax, for example, over the past few years. But what they forget, sometimes I should say, but is that last year there were 30,000 more filers of state income tax than there were the year before. And the year before that, I believe it was right around 20,000 new tax returns. So that is going to boost your revenue a great deal. And I think that the governor, the Senate, and the House are all looking at the proposals to do some tax reductions, do some infrastructure work, do some catch-up infrastructure work, and then save some money.
And how much money is going to be saved, do you think?
Right now, if we close the books today, I think we're close to, in our strategic budget reserve, some would call it rainy day fund. It's close to $680 million, which is a pretty large amount of money. At the end of the day, those who are watching the legislature should watch that number, because my prediction, this is my prediction now, I'm just sitting in the back of the room.
Here comes the magic asterisk, I think.
The magic asterisk is to not put as much money into that fund. If you have $680 million sitting there in a reserve fund, there are people that are going to say the state is really becoming a savings and loan. I mean, there is a limit. You've got to have money. You've got to have money saved, because you never know what the federal government is going to do tomorrow, or what might happen with fracking and all of these different Chicken Little kinds of things that could happen. I mean, we have to be prudent. We have to have money put aside. But then the question is, how much is enough? How much is too much? Well,
one of the funds that's been dipped into with some enthusiasm is something called the Strategic Investments and Improvements Fund, which the estimated revenue on June 30th of next year is, or I should say 2015, is $1.6 billion. And as I understand it, that balance would go down quite a bit under the legislature's spending plan.
Right, and that I call it the SIF fund. But anyway,
I call it the slush fund, but that's just a matter of semantics.
We used to have the oil, what was it called?
It was called the Permanent Oil
Trust Fund, which was anything but permanent,
and
because
it wasn't a trust fund either.
It was the cream can. I mean, there are funds that are constitutional that we can't touch, whether it's the legacy fund or the various school trust funds. The legislature can't trust them. But this was a fund set up actually last session, which allowed money, particularly unanticipated money that would come into the state treasury, to go to different areas, whether it was schools, whether it was some to the legacy fund. And it ended up being a lot more money than anyone anticipated it being. Right now, the actual amount that's in it is kind of in question, because part of the spending that has gone on, part of the infrastructure spending and other spending, has come from that SIF fund. And the estimate I heard today is $400 or $500 million in that particular fund. So, and the money in there has been used for all kinds of different things. We have done some where we just take the money from that fund and just put it right back into the general fund.
One of the strategies I was wanting to ask you about, you've alluded to one of them, is the Budget Stabilization Fund is going to have about $680 million, and maybe that would be reduced as a way to either hold up the spending or increase the tax cuts. The other is the Foundation Aid Stabilization Fund, which has been used once in the last 10 years, I believe, for the tune of $5 million. It has it's supposed to have at the end of the next biennium $600 million in it, and it's something that the legislature could, if it chose to, touch with some enthusiasm. And I was wondering if that was an option as well.
Yes and no. It's an option, but only with the approval of the voters, because that is one of the constitutional funds. There was at least 2 constitutional amendment proposals this time to take money out of that particular fund. I know the one was defeated. I don't know what happened to the other one. The problem is when you put something on the ballot that to the voters it is, we want the legislature to have access to this education money. They get very nervous, particularly if they don't know where the money is going. I think a proposal that has been out there to utilize that money for scholarships for North Dakota residents going to our university system makes a lot of sense, and I think the voters might buy something like that, but giving them an open-ended, giving the legislature carte blanche to put the money where they want would be greeted, I think, with a lot of suspicion.
What sort of property tax strategy do you think is going to prevail by the time everything is done? Because we have a proposal to give folks a income tax credit based on how much property tax they pay. We have the famous mill levy buy-down program, which essentially subsidizes the property tax of a local school district. And we have other possibilities as well. How do you think that is going to resolve itself?
I think we're going to end up around the goal of a number of folks in the Senate, and I support that, is to have a number around $1 billion of tax relief in various mixes. The Senate has passed $714 million worth of property tax relief within the school education funding bill. And you're right, there are some other bills out there that add up to some more. I mean, it's different because there's homestead tax credit, there is the buy down, there is the measure you mentioned about income tax, which is what we did in 2007. You got a credit on your income tax for property taxes you paid up to $1,000, I believe it was. Yeah. That idea is still alive and floating around the legislature.
Is there less enthusiasm, as there was before, for reducing income taxes, both individual and corporate?
I think that still needs to play out. Remember, the House passed a total of $501 million worth of income tax and corporate income tax reductions. The Senate has had 2 iterations. The latest one was $190 million of property tax, of income and corporate tax relief. The Senate Appropriations Committee voted to reduce that to the governor's level of 125, and we took the difference, the $65 million that was, shall we say, scooped up from that amendment, and put it into the Oil Impact Fund for Western North Dakota infrastructure.
And one of the things that's caused some consternation in Western North Dakota is the changes made to the Hub Cities bill, which funneled a great deal of money to Western North Dakota. How happy do you think folks are going to be with the final product there?
I still am optimistic that at the end of the day we will do a pretty good job. You know, I mean, you have to remember, and some folks forget, that within the first month and a half of the legislature, we sent $620 million of infrastructure road money out to the West, which they will say, I mean, the Highway Department will say they were able to get competitive bids and lower bids by us doing something we had never done before, which was sending money out right away. And the other big money saver was the contractors could bid and they could get their equipment moved before load limits came on. So it was a win-win for everyone. We got some criticism because people would say, well, if you're giving money for that, there's also human service needs, there's educate, all these other needs quickly rose to the surface. But we sent that money out, and I'm glad we did. By the way, I was sponsor of the bill.
Yes, you were. I was going to mention that, actually. One of the items that is going through a bit of controversy on the last couple of days has been, how does the legislature pay for college building projects? Are there building projects that are specified in legislation with the amount of money that's to be spent on them, or do we have a pool of cash to draw upon for building projects, and also who makes the decision as to which projects to select? What do you think about the approach of having a money pool for building projects for the university system that the Board of Higher Education would make decisions on where it was spent?
Well, I think that's going to be a hot topic of conversation. I don't know if it's been fully vetted how the measure that the House has passed conforms to what the North Dakota Supreme Court did in the 1960s, which threw out a pool of money, saying it was an unconstitutional delegation of legislative authority. Now, in this measure, as I understand it, they have some language that says, here's the $160 million, and you can build these things as long as they conform to a master plan that you put together. And I'm sure some would argue that, well, if you're saying here's $160 million that you can spend, and you get to design the plan to decide which building conforms to your plan, that might be suspect. So I think there's a long ways to go on that. And then you've got legislators that would look at the board and look at the list of what the governor had put in there and say, well, NDSU and UND will suck up all the money, so we're going to be left out in the cold. So I think there'll be there'll be some parochialism.
Just one quick question. When is the legislature going to end?
When the gavel comes down. I have no idea. It will be closer to 80 days, very close to 80 days. It won't be 75, or tomorrow is the 70th day.
Yes, it is. We've been speaking to Senator Ray Holmberg. He's a Republican from Grand Forks and the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He is the longest-serving state senator in the Senate at present, with the retirement of David Nething last year. And up next, we will be speaking to the president of the Greater North Dakota Association, Andy Peterson. This is Dale Wetzel at the Legislature Today.